안녕하십니까? 한국종교협의회와 종교신문이 함께 진행하는 종교인 인터뷰 시간입니다. 오늘은 특별히 머나먼 이곳 미국까지 찾아왔습니다. 미국 라스베가스에서요. 우리 Aclc 공동의장을 맡고 계시는 닥터 라우스 목사님을 모시고 함께 이야기 나누는 시간을 갖게 되었습니다. 닥터 라우스 박사님께서는 조셉 베티아 교회의 초대 목사로서 교회를 설립하셨고요. 또 사우스 캐롤라이나 연합 감리교의 통합 목회자로 계시면서 현재는 Aclc 공동의장직을 맡고 계십니다. 루온 아브람 라우스 박사님 모시고 함께 많은 이야기 나누는 시간 갖도록 하겠습니다. Thank you so much, Dr. Rouse.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good to be with you.
우리 한국종교협의회 유튜브를 시청하고 계시는 구독자 여러분, 여러분들께 우리 라우스 박사님께서 간단한 인사 말씀과 그리고 소개하시는 말씀을 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yeah, well, as you stated, I am Luan Abram Rouse, and I would like to say hello to everyone that's listening and that will receive what we are able to impart from this interview. And I was born in South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, and after some years of pastoring in New York City, I ended up with 42 years pastoring in the United Methodist Church. The majority of those years were spent in South Carolina, building human relationships there. And then for the latter 18 years of my ministry, I was in New York City and on Long Island of New York. So Marie and I are glad at this time in our history, after we retired from the United Methodist Church, to be able to serve in many capacities of Christianity, but one that we enjoy very deeply is working with the American Clergy Leadership Conference. Well, I actually became the national co-chairman in 2019. But my journey to the American Clergy Leadership Conference was an interesting one for me. For a friend who's now deceased, Lonnie McLeod, became the dean of the Unification Theological Seminary. And he came over and asked me would I teach pastoral counseling for him, because I'm a psychotherapist specializing in pastoral counseling, marriage and family therapy. So he wanted me to teach it to the students there, and I agreed. And in so doing, I don't like to be in any place where I don't learn everything that I can. So I started going to the library, reading everything that I needed to read about Unification Church, about Reverend Sun Myung Moon, about Dr. Ha Cha-Han Moon, and came to appreciate who they are and the movement itself. And I'm still teaching at the seminary now, as a matter of fact. Some other courses, various courses, but I'm still there. And I started doing that in 2007. So I've been around the movement for a while. But I actually started teaching in seminary at Erskine Theological Seminary in the 90s. A little segment of my course on world religions. I taught about the unification movement in Reverend Sun Myung Moon.
앞서 소개해드린 대로 목사님께서는 오랜 기간 목회를 하시면서 다양한 직책을 맡으신 걸로 알고 있습니다. 어떻게 목회자의 길을 선택하셨고 또 그 계기와 지금까지 목회자로서 길을 걸어오기까지 그 과정에 대한 이야기를 간단하게 말씀해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
I was born into a Methodist preacher's home. My father was a pastor, but my mother was also a preacher. My grandfather was a preacher. His brothers were preachers. His father was a preacher. His grandparents were preachers. I'm fifth generation, actually, of Methodist preachers. Yes. And Methodism stuck with my family on the Scipio side, and actually with Sylvia, that I actually could trace back to coming to America on a slave ship. And she was very grounded in God, and Methodism became attracted to her because of its message of Jesus Christ. And so the family has been in a Methodist tradition since that time, and that was in the 1800s that she actually came to America.
You have that kind of exactly background.
Yes. And I love to we had a family historian, and Janet, and it's been about 3 years ago now that I preached her eulogy, but annually she would keep us up on new findings of our ancestry.
Thank you.
Yeah. But I was interested in preaching since I was 5 years old. And then I had an experience with Jesus Christ at the age of 16. And from that time until now, I've been carrying the gospel.
목사님께서는 그 목회자의 길을 걸어오시기까지 분명히 하나님으로부터의 은혜가 있으셨고 그것을 기반으로 한 이 목회자의 사명이 지금까지 이어져 오고 있다고 저는 생각을 하고 있습니다. 하지만 결코 쉬운 길이 아니었을 텐데요. 그 쉽지 않은 목회자의 길을 지금까지 지탱할 수 있도록 해주신 어떤 특별한 그런 에피소드가 있다고 한다면 소개해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Well, I've had just great pastorates, really. And I started pastoring when I was in college. And so by being a pastor in college, I guess the greatest challenge at that time was for those who were older to entrust the care of their lives, not only to a young pastor in his 20s, but to one who would actually render effective pastoral care to them. And I think it stuck that way. Even when I first came out of seminary and I was pastoring 3 other churches, I was still like 25 years old. And even though I'd been pastoring I was 25. But now I started pastoring a church on my own when I was 21. Before that, I was an associate with my father from age 17 until 21. And still the biggest question was, who's this young preacher? But then when you share truth, that easily goes away. And members want you to be their pastors forever. I found, as an itinerant minister in the United Methodist Church, that probably the most difficult part of my ministry was leaving somewhere. And I had the opportunity to be a part of church startups. I was trained to be a church planter. And in being in that light, that brought its own unique challenges. But again, people who would unite with me would be like family. So the most difficult time was the leaving time.
목사님께서 지금 현재 공동장으로 계시는 Aclc 미국기독교성직자협의회는 약 40년이라고 하는 이 기간 동안 미국 내에서 기독교 목사들을 중심으로 초교파 활동을 펼치고 있습니다. 목사님께서는 현재 공동장으로서 이 단체를 지금 책임맡고 계시는데 목사님께서 바라보시는 Aclc만의 어떤 비전, 그것이 무엇이고 앞으로 나가야 할 방향성, Aclc가 어떠한 방향으로 나가야 할 것인가에 대해서 말씀해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Oh, man, that's a great question. Aclc at this time is changing its vision slightly, but not leaving its mission. The vision now is about 2 weeks old, this new vision, which is to recognize who everyone is in leadership of any particular faith group. We want to realize where they are in their relationship with God and give respect to that. Because what we are seeking is for them to recognize who we are and respect who we are on the Christian mission. And that our aim is to unite with the validity of the unification movement. So part of our thrust is to help people to see us on the Christian mission just as Jesus Christ commissioned his disciples to be. But the difference with us is we see the validity in the unification movement. And we want unity with that. But we feel that it will strengthen our clergy coalition, 1. And then 2, we feel that it's going to help us to rebuild family relationships. We believe that all families ought to be the way in which God originally intended them to be. in right relationship with God and right relationship with one another. Likewise, then, we want to look at the social development in our communities based on those families being who they are to be in the right relationship with God and one another. Therefore, we are looking at restoring communities. Communities have been damaged, according to what we have taken in to see, by the fact that families are damaged and broken. And we want to help heal the brokenness, thereby restoring the community. And in so doing, we renew the nation and the world. That's really the focus, vision, and thrust of the American Clergy Leadership Conference, to reach all people of the world. And we're starting with some reasonable, at least in our minds, expectations. We are hoping to reach by 2027 1/3 of the Christian population with this message. And if we reach that sector of our faith group with the message and they get on board, then they help us to reach the other parts of the world, not only with Christianity, but also with our interreligious relationships.
미국이라고 하는 나라는 다인종 국가입니다. 그리고 그만큼 또 다양한 종교가 존재하고 있는 나라인데요. 그러한 차원에서 목사님께서 Aclc를 중심으로 하는 이 초교파 활동을 넘어서 다른 종교와 함께 할 수 있는 초종교적인 활동들은 어떠한 활동들을 펼치고 계시는지 궁금하고요. 서로의 종교를 이해하기 위해 우리가 가져야 할 자세가 무엇인지 말씀해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Yes, multi-generational, multicultural, the vast differences in our ethnic groups is a reality within America. People are living longer, so you get generations in that a multi-generational situation where some of those who are older have seen relationships with various ethnicities in a different way in which those who are younger. And as a matter of fact, I grew up with in a generation within America where we were at the tail end of racial discrimination, meaning that for the first 6 years of my education in America, I went to segregated schools. Blacks went to one school, whites went to another, and that type of thing. But then that changed.
Yeah.
And when that changed, I began to go to an integrated school, and we tried to make it constructive integration, as Martin Luther King Jr. called it. And it didn't always work out very constructively. There were some things, damages in human relationships that still have not been fully repaired yet today. And that's unfortunate for us. And I think Martin Luther King Jr. having been killed in 1968 before he could fully teach us how to do it constructively contributed to that. However, I do believe that the church is slower than society. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We still call many of our churches black churches.
Still,
Still.
that's a reality.
That's the reality. Yeah. And of course, we go through the ethnic thing too, but usually when we were going with Asian churches or Korean churches, Chinese churches, it was because of language differences,
right.
to be honest. And if the languages were understood together, people would worship together. There's no problem. But we still have that stigma when it comes to blacks and whites. And blacks seeing that black colleges, for instance, historically, that's garnered another interest, high interest again. And black churches have somewhat felt that we don't want to give up our black churches and see what we've seen happen in the education arena. People choose to go to these other schools that we could not go to, and then we look at the buildings we invested in, and they're deteriorating. They're being left abandoned. Yeah. We don't want to do that to our churches, is what they're saying. And I have always been, however, on the side to say we have too many black churches in white structures. And that we need to really work on making it where it's not about the shade of skin. It is really about the relationship that informs our faith and how to be in a right relationship with God and a right relationship with one another. And then just band together and take care of all of those facilities. Or sell them and still come together as one. But if we choose to keep them small, still open your doors, open your hearts, open your minds to receive people regardless of the shade of skin. And I still believe that that's where we need to go.
목사님께서는 기도할 때나 말씀을 전할 때 보면은 굉장히 강력한 영적 파워를 일으키시는 것 같습니다. 그럴 수 있는 배경을 여쭤보면 당연히 하나님이시라고 하시겠지만 구체적으로 그 영적 파워의 출처가 뿌리가 어떻게 되는지 궁금한데요. 기도하는 신앙인으로서 언제나 그러한 영적 파워를 발휘하면서 살아가기 위해서 우리가 어떻게 할 수 있을지 한번 말씀해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
I desire a walk with God daily. I desire the guidance of God all the time.
How can we make the kinds of standard in our life?
One, I must admit, I had a great teacher. My mother used to teach me from her lap to be in relationship with God. It helped me with my understanding of God's actions and God's love and God's work through Jesus Christ, who I never saw like I would see my mother. But because of the teachings from my mother, I could understand the Spirit of Christ when I experienced it at the age of 16. So I contribute a lot to teaching. I contribute a lot also to the instantaneous experience that one can have. But if one does not experience the Spirit of the living Lord, then one needs to be guided and taught by one's do. And therefore, I have to take my teachings and my preachings, my praying, all very serious and sincere, and to bring my total self to it. I like to tell people, if you're not available to God and you have to represent God, then you can't be available to the people if you don't represent very well, effectively. You need to be in that right relationship with God and make sure that you're being guided by that Spirit of God, not your own self or anything of that nature. So I ask God every day, and many times, 5 times a day, let me represent you.
목사님께서 생각하시는 ACLC와 KCLC가 함께 할 수 있는 일, 그것을 어떻게 할 수 있을지 목사님의 어떤 계획이나 비전을 한번 말씀해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Compassionate relationship. Relationship must have within it a heart for one another. When we're able to heart one another, then we allow our feelings to be real and respected at the table, not just our thoughts. But I have to be concerned about how my brothers and my sisters are feeling. And if I can do that with them, my belief is that they will reciprocate and do the same with me. And the way in which I choose to do that is to feel that everything that they're saying is important. So I don't count on my thoughts. I count on the importance of what they're feeling in order that I can make sure that I'm seeking to understand what God would have me understand from the words that my brother and sister that I've invited into a conversation or that invited me into a conversation has to say. So I don't go into a conversation having just a complete answer. I go into the conversation being open to determine an answer. And as long as we're open with one another and honest with one another relative to what we feel and the things that we think can can be brought to a place where we reason together, then we can come to what we believe. And when we come to that which we believe, that's going to determine the consequences. And that belief is formulated by our sharing. Then we reach the point. We believe that whatever we come to determine now that we're on this track, this road. What I really like about that form of transformation is that it still leaves open. If this doesn't work, we just talk again. We could try another way, but we'll be at this together to try to make it work, rather than for me to come in with an answer and try to force feed something that will lead on a path to discord and war. What we want to do is make a beautiful world, a beloved community, a holy community. And to do that, I believe we've got to be on that path that leads to world peace.
오늘 목사님의 개인적인 신앙적 배경 그리고 목사님의 목회 경험 그것에 근거한 초종교 운동에 대한 비전 여러 가지 좋은 말씀들을 많이 해주셨습니다. 이제 오늘 인터뷰를 마무리하면서 끝으로 대한민국에서 이웃 종단과 함께 초종교 운동을 펼치고 있는 우리 IAPD, Aclc 회원분들 그리고 한국종교협의회 종교 지도자들 그리고 유튜브를 시청하고 계시는 우리 구독자분들을 위해서 마지막 인사 말씀 부탁드리겠습니다.
Oh yes, that's a loaded task, and loaded in this way, in sincerity to everyone that will view this, listen to this. I'd like to say it's loaded because it must be replete with love. It has to be replete with that openness that comes with what we call in the Christian arena from the Greek agape, which says humans come as close to imaging Jesus Christ and God as is recorded in 2 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, 17th and 18th verses. That we want to glorify God and seek to live for the sake of others. That's what that scripture is really all about. So I would say to those who are in an interreligious dialogue, remember living for the sake of others, glorifying God, not self, brings in that agape love. I am going to be so deeply concerned about where you are in your relationship with God and looking at what is happening in the world that we live within, that I invite you to do likewise with me. And together, we're going to get the best out of this that we can for the making of better relationships, for the making of a better world. Now, how does that come about?
오늘 우리 라오스 박사님과 함께 이야기하면서 많은 것을 느낄 수 있었는데 종교 간의 대화 그리고 종교인으로서의 책임 그것을 위해서 우리에게 많은 노력과 그리고 새로운 자세 수용하고 존중할 줄 아는 그러한 종교인으로서의 기본적인 태도들이 필요하다는 것을 많이 느낄 수 있었습니다. 오늘 시청해 주신 우리 종교신문 그리고 한국종교협의회 구독자분들께 감사드리고요. 다시 한번 우리 라오스 박사님께도 감사드립니다. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Reverend Moon.
Thank you.
God bless you.